drift into the dark and haunting world of Five Nights at Freddy's, exploring the full timeline of Fredbear's family diner, haunted animatronics, William Afton, Michael Afton, and the tragedies hidden behind Fazbear Entertainment. If you enjoy relaxing game lore and sleep stories like this, subscribe to Midnight Lore, like the video, and let this story carry you gently into the night.
Tonight, let us drift slowly into one of the strangest, darkest, and most mysterious stories in gaming. A story told through flickering cameras, empty dining rooms, children's laughter long since gone quiet, and animatronic faces frozen in smiles that feel just a little too still. This is the world of Five Nights at Freddy's, a world of family restaurants and birthday parties, of stage lights and arcade carpets, of mascots built to entertain children, and secrets buried so deeply beneath them that even the truth seems to move in fragments. Tonight, we will not rush. We will take our time. We will move gently through the long, tangled history of this universe, beginning not with a scream, not with a jump scare, and not with a security office late at night, but with something much older. A business, a partnership, a dream that should have been harmless. Because before there were haunted animatronics, missing children, and underground facilities, there was the simple idea of making something families would love, a place where children could laugh, a place where food, music, and entertainment came together, a place where bright colors and familiar characters could make people feel safe. That is one of the reasons the story of Five Nights at Freddy's feels so unsettling. The horror does not begin in a graveyard. It begins in a restaurant, a place built for celebration, a place made to feel warm. And like so many unsettling stories, what makes it powerful is the contrast, the cheerful surface, and the darkness underneath. At the center of this beginning are two men whose names echo through almost every corner of the FNaF timeline: Henry Emily and William Afton. These two men are among the most important figures in the entire series, and their relationship forms the foundation of almost everything that follows. Henry is often understood as the quieter of the two. An engineer, a builder, a creator, someone deeply involved in the technical side of animatronic design and family entertainment. There is something tragic about Henry because he seems, at least compared to what comes later, like someone who genuinely wanted to make something joyful. He wanted to build wonder. He wanted to create characters, performances, and systems that could bring delight to children and families. William Afton, however, is different. Afton is one of the most haunting antagonists in horror gaming, not because he is loud, but because he is patient, controlled, hidden. He exists behind smiles, behind uniforms, behind mascots, behind companies, behind machinery. And that hiddenness matters, because William Afton is not simply a man who commits evil openly. He is a man who places evil inside systems that look harmless. Together, Henry and William appear to have been involved in the creation of early family entertainment businesses, and from these beginnings grew the identities and locations that would later become famous and infamous under the name of Fazbear Entertainment. Now, in the earliest layers of the story, there is still uncertainty and interpretation around certain exact sequences, which is one of the reasons FNaF lore has always felt like a puzzle more than a straight line. The timeline is built from mini-games, hidden details, scattered clues, voice lines, newspaper fragments, retro-style visual storytelling, and later revelations. But even within that fragmented structure, a broad emotional truth becomes clear. The beginning was small, not yet a giant corporate labyrinth, not yet a franchise of endless locations and rebrandings, just entertainment, engineering, stage performances, mascot characters, and among the earliest known names associated with this age is Fredbear's Family Diner. Fredbear's Family Diner carries an almost mythic quality in the FNaF story. It is one of the earliest central places, smaller, older, simpler than the larger Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations that would later become more famous. In this earlier stage, the cast of characters is more limited, the atmosphere more intimate, the sense of local family business identity more present. And yet that intimacy makes the tragedy stronger. Fredbear's Family Diner is closely tied to two central animatronic figures, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. These are not just ordinary mascots in the story's logic. They are early symbolic pillars. Their designs and mechanisms connect directly to one of the most important technical and narrative ideas in the entire FNaF universe, the Springlock suits. Now, Springlock suits are among the most unsettling pieces of technology in the series because they are both clever and deeply unsafe. They are hybrid animatronic costumes, machines that can function either as performance robots or as wearable suits for human performers. In theory, they are ingenious. A single mascot can be both an animatronic character and something an employee can wear inside, depending on the needs of the show. In practice, they are terrifying. The Springlock mechanisms hold dangerous internal parts away from the wearer's body while the suit is in safe mode. But moisture, sudden movement, failure, or instability can cause those mechanisms to slip. And when they slip, the result is catastrophic. This is classic FNaF. The horror is not just supernatural, it is mechanical, corporate, procedural. Something designed to be efficient and charming contains within it the possibility of gruesome failure. That matters enormously, because Five Nights at Freddy's often feels like a collision between two different kinds of fear: the fear of ghosts and the fear of machinery. Both are always there. Now let us remain for a moment in the earliest age of Fredbears. Imagine the dining room, smaller than later locations, warm lighting, a stage, children with pizza and paper cups, bright colors, the smell of food and carpet and old electronics, a mascot song playing, parents watching, employees performing routine tasks. At a distance, everything feels ordinary. That is exactly what makes what follows so terrible. Because into this world of routine celebration enters the first great shadow. One of the most important emotional centers of early FNaF lore is the tragedy surrounding the crying child, often associated by fans with the events leading up to what is commonly called the Bite of 83. This child is deeply important, not just because of what happens to him, but because his fear gives FNaF one of its earliest truly tragic emotional cores. He is not merely a victim placed into the story to trigger plot. He represents vulnerability inside a world that treats frightening mascots as harmless fun. His fear of the animatronics, his isolation, his emotional distress, all of this gives the story an intimate sadness before the mythology expands into larger horrors. The child appears deeply afraid, surrounded by a world where other people dismiss or fail to understand the intensity of his fear. Depending on how one interprets the household dynamics and minigame imagery, his life seems marked by tension, cruelty, loneliness, and emotional pressure. The bright world of children's entertainment does not feel safe to him. It feels threatening. This inversion is one of the key tonal achievements of FNaF. What should comfort the child becomes the thing he fears most. And somewhere within this tragedy stands a cruel older brother figure, often understood as a source of torment. The child is bullied, frightened, and humiliated. What should be a place of fun becomes the stage for a terrible mistake. That mistake culminates in a birthday scene at Fredbear's family diner. The crying child is brought too close to Fredbear. There is laughter, mockery, the atmosphere of childhood cruelty layered over a supposedly happy celebration. And then, catastrophe. Fredbear's mouth closes on the child's head. This is one of the defining moments in the series. A birthday party becomes trauma. A mascot becomes a weapon through accident or failure. A child's worst fear becomes real. The event is known widely as the Bite of '83, though the chronology and exact labels across different fan interpretations were for years debated intensely. Still, the emotional meaning is unmistakable. Something broke here. Not just a body, a world. The child is carried away gravely injured. The tragedy reshapes the emotional and symbolic structure of the story. Fredbear's is no longer just an early family diner. It becomes a place marked by irreversible loss. And in the soft, cryptic language of FNaF storytelling, the aftermath becomes tied to memory, guilt, and the strange possibility that death in this universe is not final in the ordinary way. That is one of the most important things to understand about Five Nights at Freddy's. The dead do not always leave. Children, especially, become central to the supernatural architecture of the world. Their suffering lingers. Their spirits seem bound to places, suits, and objects. Emotional energy, violence, memory, and machinery begin to merge into something deeply unnatural. And while this first major tragedy is devastating, it is not the only one. Because William Afton's darkness is not an accident. It is a pattern. Before or around the earliest restaurant era, another crucial tragedy enters the timeline. The death of Charlotte Emily, often called Charlie. Charlie is Henry's daughter, and her death is one of the foundational sorrows of the entire FNaF saga. In many interpretations of the timeline, she becomes the first child murdered by William Afton. Whether placed at the exact earliest position or very near it, her death is spiritually central. She represents the beginning of the pattern of murdered children whose spirits remain bound to the animatronic world. The imagery associated with Charlie's death is among the most haunting in the series. A child outside, rain, isolation, a moment of vulnerability, and then William Afton acting in cruelty that seems at once deliberate and coldly practical. Charlie dies outside the restaurant. But death is not the end of her story. In one of the most important supernatural turns in the franchise, Charlie becomes associated with the puppet, also known as Marionette. The puppet is one of the most emotionally important entities in FNaF because it is not merely aggressive or frightening. It feels mournful, protective in a broken way, a witness and caretaker of dead children. The puppet stands near the center of the series' supernatural logic, helping explain how the spirits of murdered children become connected to the animatronics. This is vital. Without the puppet, the story is just murder and haunted robots. With the puppet, it becomes something more ritualistic and sorrowful, a child spirit guiding other child spirits into the suits, a kind of broken afterlife management inside a corporate entertainment space. That is deeply tragic and deeply FNaF. The child is murdered. The spirit remains. The machine becomes a body. The restaurant becomes a tomb disguised as a party venue. Now the story begins to expand from the earliest diner era toward larger Fazbear locations, especially Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Over time, the old local entertainment business becomes more developed, more branded, and more commercial. Characters like Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy emerge as central icons of the franchise both in-universe and out. These characters are cheerful on the surface, beloved mascots, performers, friends to children, and yet in the long view of the timeline, they become vessels of grief and vengeance. That is the core contradiction of the series. The brighter the branding, the darker the hidden meaning. At some point within this broader early era occurs one of the most important events in the entire FNaF mythos, the missing children incident. This event is foundational. It marks the moment where William Afton's violence expands into the murder of multiple children, and where the supernatural haunting of the animatronics becomes central to the identity of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza itself. The broad shape is horrifyingly simple. Children are lured, disappeared, killed. And the company, rather than confront the full moral horror of what has happened, becomes associated with concealment, denial, rumor, and the slow decay of trust. The details of how exactly the bodies were hidden and how the spirits came to inhabit the animatronics emerge through layers of interpretation, but the emotional truth is clear enough. The main cast of animatronics becomes haunted by murdered children: Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and often associated with them, Golden Freddy, one of the most enigmatic and unsettling figures in the whole story. Golden Freddy is especially important because the character seems to exist at the border between ordinary haunting and something more abstract, more unstable, more spiritually broken. He is not just another mascot with a ghost inside. He feels like a wound in the logic of the universe, appearing strangely, behaving outside standard animatronic rules, and carrying an aura of unfinished rage. This matters because FNaF is not horror built from a single clear rule system. It is horror built from accumulating unease. Some spirits are bound more directly. Some entities feel more symbolic. Some machines are haunted. Some are almost memory echoes. Golden Freddy is one of the places where the myth becomes most dreamlike and difficult to pin down. Now let us pause and imagine what Freddy Fazbear's Pizza becomes after the missing children incident. The lights still turn on. The posters still hang. The music still plays. Parents may still bring children, at least for a time. Employees still work shifts. The mascots still move on stage. But the air has changed. Rumors spread. Whispers follow the brand. Something feels wrong. The animatronics do not just entertain anymore. They watch. They move strangely. They seem heavy with something unseen. And from here, the story of FNaF becomes not just a corporate horror tale, but a haunted history. One where business decisions, mechanical design, family tragedy, murder, guilt, and restless spirits become inseparable. This is why the lore is so compelling. It is not merely who killed whom. It is, how did pain become architecture? How did grief enter the machinery? How did a company keep operating while death remained inside its mascots? How did entertainment become curse? And looming behind all of it is William Afton, not yet fully exposed in every way, not yet reduced to one final form, but already acting as the great hidden poison in the timeline. He murders, he conceals, he manipulates, and the business around him keeps turning. That is one of the most disturbing truths in Five Nights at Freddy's. The horror is not only supernatural, it is managerial. The restaurant stays open. The company keeps moving forward. Branding survives, even after children are gone. In the next part, we will move further into the rise of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza as a larger brand, the haunted animatronics, the growing cover-ups, the Night Guard era, and the road toward the events most closely associated with the original Five Nights at Freddy's game. For now, rest here, in the earliest age, where the stage lights still glow softly, where Fredbear and Spring Bonnie still seem like simple mascots from a happier time, and where the first terrible truth of this universe has already begun to settle into place. That some places do not stop holding children after the children are gone. The earliest shadows are already behind us. Fredbear's family diner has already been marked by tragedy. The crying child's fate has already turned a place of childhood celebration into something sadder, stranger, and far more haunted than it was ever meant to become. Charlotte Emily has already died. The puppet has already entered the story as one of the great mourning presences at its center. And somewhere behind stage curtains, behind uniforms, behind mascots and business structures, William Afton is already moving through the timeline as its great hidden poison. Now the world of Five Nights at Freddy's expands. What was once smaller, more intimate, more local, begins to take on the shape of a recognizable brand. This is where Freddy Fazbear's Pizza becomes central. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is one of those places that becomes larger in memory than in architecture. Even if the rooms themselves are only dining halls, party spaces, arcades, offices, stages, kitchens, and maintenance areas, the place feels mythic because of what happened there. It is not just a restaurant. It is a repeating structure of entertainment and concealment. By now, the cast of mascots is more familiar in the form most people associate with Five Nights at Freddy's. Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie Chica Foxy, and somewhere close to them in meaning, if not always in ordinary presence, Golden Freddy. The company presents these characters as friendly entertainment figures. They sing, they perform, they smile. They stand beneath bright lights in front of children eating pizza and celebrating birthdays. Posters, mascots, prizes, decorations, and bright branding all work together to create a feeling of warmth and harmless fun. And this is where FNaF's horror becomes especially effective, because everything about the visual language says safe for children. Everything underneath says absolutely not. Now we move deeper into the missing children incident, one of the most important events in the entire series. This incident is not just another tragedy among many. It is the defining, haunting event that transforms Freddy Fazbear's Pizza from a suspicious children's restaurant with rumors into a place spiritually poisoned by unresolved murder. The broad story is terrifyingly simple, and that simplicity makes it worse. William Afton, using disguise, access, and the trust structures built around the restaurant environment, lures children away. He murders them, and their bodies are hidden in connection with the animatronics. That is the emotional core of the event, and everything else radiates outward from it. Children vanish inside a place built to delight children. A mascot or employee figure becomes the lure. The company's response becomes one of concealment, denial, and operational continuation. And the animatronics become vessels. This is crucial. The reason the main animatronic cast matters so much is not just because they are robots that move at night. It is because they are associated with dead children whose suffering has been trapped inside the very mascots meant to entertain the living. This is not just haunting. It is corruption of symbolism itself. A bear for children becomes a prison. A bunny for children becomes a grave. A chicken for children becomes a witness. A fox for children becomes rage behind a stage curtain. Now, depending on how one arranges or interprets the exact internal lore across games, minigames, hidden clues, and later revelations, the number of victims and their precise identities can be mapped with different levels of detail. But the heart of the matter is stable enough. Multiple murdered children become spiritually associated with the animatronics. This is where the role of the puppet becomes emotionally vital. The puppet is often understood as the one who gives life in a broken spiritual sense, helping the dead children inhabit or connect with the suits. This is not resurrection in a peaceful form. It is a tragic binding, a continuation inside machinery. The children do not move on cleanly. They remain. And because they remain in a world where memory is fragmented and violence was never properly acknowledged, their continued existence becomes angry, confused, reactive, and unresolved. This gives the animatronics their strange emotional quality. They are frightening, yes, but they are also tragic. They are not simply evil robots. They are the afterimages of murdered children inside entertainment mascots, moving through nights after business hours in search of something they cannot properly name. Justice, perhaps, recognition, or simply release. Now let us imagine Freddy Fazbear's Pizza after the missing children incident has happened, whether publicly known in full or only half suspected through rumor and fear. The restaurant is still decorated. The arcades still hum. Birthday tables are still laid out. Promotional material still presents smiling mascots. The stage lights still come on. Employees still clock in. The company still does what companies so often do when confronted with unbearable truth. It continues. That continuation is one of the darkest aspects of the story. The business does not immediately collapse forever. It shifts, rebrands, delays, distances, explains, and carries on. That is deeply disturbing, because it means horror is not just hidden in the ghosts. It is hidden in procedure. A restaurant where children disappeared remains operationally legible. A company with blood inside its mascots still issues statements. The machine of entertainment keeps moving. And as the story progresses, the animatronics begin to exhibit behavior that cannot be comfortably explained. They move unexpectedly. They appear in places they should not be. They become the center of rumors. Their eyes and posture and strange nighttime activity begin to suggest that something inside them is no longer mechanical in the ordinary way. This is where we begin moving toward the era most closely associated with the original game. But before we arrive there, we need to pause at one more important concept: the company cover-up. Fazbear Entertainment is one of the most memorable fictional corporations in horror gaming because it is both absurd and believable. It is absurd in how often it tries to survive catastrophic scandal. It is believable in how it prioritizes brand management, legal distance, and operational continuity over moral clarity. It does not behave like a grieving institution. It behaves like a business trying to outlast liability. This matters because the whole FNaF story would feel different if the company were simply a mask for supernatural evil. But it is not. It is a real corporate structure with the familiar instincts of institutions under pressure. Deny, minimize, redirect, reopen, relaunch, survive the story rather than tell the truth. That instinct shapes almost every era of the timeline. A location closes, another opens, an incident happens. Explanations are softened or hidden, characters are redesigned, policies change, branding adapts, but the dead remain. This is why the series feels so uncanny. The company keeps refreshing itself. The haunting does not. Now let us turn more directly toward the animatronics themselves, because by this stage they are becoming less like simple stage performers and more like presences. Freddy becomes the central figure of the stage, the brand's namesake. the smiling bear, whose stillness is often more unsettling than movement. He represents the company's face. That makes his haunting symbolic, the mascot itself becoming a container for what the company wants least acknowledged. Bonnie, especially in early FNaF atmosphere, carries a distinct unease. There is something about the rabbit form in this setting that feels simultaneously playful and threatening. Rabbits should be gentle, but here the silhouette becomes lankier, stranger, more intrusive. Chica brings another kind of discomfort, a character built for cheerful child-friendliness becoming vacant, hungry, and wrong in posture and presence. Foxy is perhaps the most visibly unstable of the main group, often hidden, damaged, faster, more feral in feel, associated with curtains and sudden violent motion. He feels like a secret already half broken loose from containment. And then there is Golden Freddy. Golden Freddy is one of the hardest figures in the series to reduce cleanly, because he seems to exist partly outside normal animatronic rules. He appears like a memory, a collapsed costume, a spectral intrusion, a symbol of unresolved rage, a break in continuity itself. If the main animatronics feel haunted in the conventional FNaF sense, Golden Freddy feels like haunting without full material stability. This is why Golden Freddy matters so much emotionally and mythically. He is not just one more mascot. He is the feeling that the timeline itself has a wound in it. Now, as the years move forward, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza drifts toward decline. Public trust erodes. Rumors persist. The restaurant environment becomes less lively and more worn. Stains remain in memory, even if management insists everything is fine. There is a particular sadness in FNaF's settings because they are often still trying to be cheerful, long after cheerfulness has become impossible. A children's dining room with fewer children, an arcade with dead corners, a stage where mascots stand under dimmer light, a hallway where the paint peels slightly. A place not fully abandoned, but already fading. That atmosphere is essential to the original game's power. By the time we approach the events of Five Nights at Freddy's 1, the restaurant is no longer a vibrant success. It feels like a business on the edge, still open, still functioning enough to hire a security guard, but haunted not just spiritually, but economically. This is no thriving family destination anymore. It is a tired building with a night shift. And into that night shift enters one of the most famous structural ideas in horror gaming, the security office. The office in FNaF 1 is small, boxed in, fragile. It is not a place of real control. It only looks like one. There are doors, yes, lights, cameras, a monitor. But the office is not power. It is anxiety turned into routine. The player sits and watches and reacts, trying to conserve energy while things move through the building. This idea is genius because it captures the emotional truth of the setting. You are not strong enough to solve the building. You are only trying to survive the night inside it. Before the player ever takes control, though, the game world already frames the animatronics as dangerous after hours. Employees explain this through half-joking corporate language. The famous sort of matter-of-fact speech about the characters moving at night and seeing a human without a costume as something wrong fits perfectly into Fazbear Entertainment's style. Even obvious danger is filtered through company-normalized absurdity. This is where Phone Guy becomes so important. Phone Guy is one of the quiet, genius elements of the first game. He is not a grand lore figure in the mythic sense, but he is emotionally central to the atmosphere. Through his recorded messages, the player receives guidance, corporate half-truths, routine reassurance, and slow-growing evidence that previous employees have already faced the same horror. Phone guy represents institutional familiarity inside Nightmare. He talks like this is all manageable, like there are procedures, like there are explanations. And in doing so, he makes the horror stranger, because the horror is being spoken about as policy. One of the most famous elements of the explanation is the idea that animatronics might mistake a human for an endoskeleton without a suit and therefore try to force that person into one, a process that would be fatal. Whether understood as a practical company excuse layered over deeper haunting behavior, it fits the FNaF tone exactly. It takes a supernatural horror situation and gives it a grotesque procedural wrapper. That blend of absurdity and dread is part of why FNaF feels so memorable. Now, let us think about the emotional state of the spirits inside the animatronics as we approach FNaF 1. They are not calm, they are not at peace, they are not able to distinguish clearly between guilt and innocence in the way the living might hope. They have suffered, been hidden, and left unresolved inside machines and inside a company that continued operating. Their movements at night feel like the result of restless, damaged, confused anger, and so the security guard becomes a target. Not necessarily because the guard deserves it, but because the system around them has made everyone interchangeable after dark. Uniforms, buildings, mascots, employees. It all blurs together inside a haunted structure where the original crime was never truly answered. Now, an important figure associated with the first game's timeline is Mike Schmidt, generally understood in the most direct game framing as the night guard working those famous nights. Across the larger lore, Mike's deeper identity becomes tangled with later revelations involving the Afton family and Michael Afton, which we will reach more fully in later parts. But for now, what matters is that the night guard figure is more than just a random employee. He becomes the human point of contact with the haunting, a witness in the office, a person listening to calls, checking cameras, and trying to survive until morning. That survival structure, midnight to 6 a.m., repeated night after night, becomes almost ritualistic. And that ritual matters, because FNaF is, in a strange way, a liturgical horror series. Same rooms, same routines, same mascots, same sounds, slight changes each night. The haunting is experienced not as one explosion of chaos, but as a repeated shift of fear through familiar systems. That is why it works so well for sleep lore too, oddly enough. Its structure is repetitive, enclosed, and rhythmic. Now, by the end of this pre-FNaF1 atmosphere, the central truths are becoming clear. Children were murdered. The animatronics are haunted. Fazbear Entertainment covered up what it could. The building remains operational enough to keep using people. William Afton's crimes are still moving through the timeline, even if not fully exposed yet. And the stage is set for the original game. A dim restaurant, a security office, a flickering camera feed, animatronics moving when they should not, a phone call in the dark, and a company that would rather replace an employee than confront the truth of why the employee was needed. Let us pause here and imagine Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in the exact emotional state before FNaF 1 fully begins. The dining room is empty now. A few paper decorations still hang. The stage sits waiting under dim light. The arcade hum is softer than it used to be. In Pirate Cove, the curtain is closed, but not still. In back rooms, old suits hold old meaning. The office fan turns. A recorded message waits to be played. And somewhere in the building, children who never went home are still trying to move through machines that were never meant to hold the dead. This is the night before the night shift becomes legend. In the next part, we will move directly into the era of FNaF 1 and the broader complications around timeline order, including the security office nights, the bite associated with later restaurant history, the toy animatronics, facial recognition systems, and the increasingly unstable attempt by Fazbear Entertainment to modernize without ever resolving the curse beneath its brand. For now, rest here, in the dim restaurant after closing, where the stage lights have cooled, the chairs are stacked, the cameras are on, and the mascots are waiting for someone to start the shift. The restaurant is dark. The office is waiting. The old mascots already hold the weight of too many nights, too many rumors, too many children who were never allowed to leave the story. But before the timeline settles fully into the familiar structure of the original 5 Nights at Freddy's game, we must move through one of the strangest and most important chapters in the entire lore. A chapter that, for many players, appeared second, but in the internal chronology reaches backward. This is the era of 5 Nights at Freddy's 2. Now, one of the reasons FNaF lore became so fascinating so quickly is that the games do not simply move forward in easy straight lines. They loop, they reveal, they imply earlier events through later releases. A sequel can become a prequel. A minigame can reframe an entire timeline. A throwaway line can turn a location from new into already doomed. FNaF 2 is essential for exactly that reason. It opens up the past. It shows us a Freddy Fazbear's pizza location that feels more modern, more brightly lit, more technologically ambitious, and in some ways more corporate than the older, decaying atmosphere of the first game's restaurant. But because this is 5 Nights at Freddy's, modernity does not mean safety. It only means the company tried to solve old horrors with new equipment, and failed. This restaurant introduces the toy animatronics. These are not the same worn, older mascots associated with the original game's main atmosphere. The toy animatronics are newer, smoother, brighter, more child-friendly in design, and more openly reflective of a corporate attempt to modernize the brand. Their faces are rounder, their bodies cleaner, their aesthetics more polished. They look like what a company would create if it wanted to reassure parents that everything was fresh, safe, and improved. That is exactly why they are so unsettling. Because when horror enters something designed to look safer, the contrast becomes sharper. The toy animatronics are also associated with upgraded systems, including security-oriented technology such as facial recognition tied, at least in company language, to criminal databases and child protection protocols. This matters deeply because it shows Fazbear Entertainment trying to solve its public trust problem through engineering rather than moral truth. That is a very FNaF move. Instead of fully facing the dead children behind the brand, the company adds better tech. Instead of spiritual repair, it tries corporate modernization. Instead of confession, it installs systems. And so the horror evolves. The major toy cast includes Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, Toy Chica, and Mangle. Each of them reflects the strange mix of cute, glossy design and underlying wrongness that defines this location. Toy Freddy feels like the company's ideal replacement bear, rounded, clean, marketable. Toy Bonnie becomes one of the most uncanny designs in the series, with a smoother, almost doll-like face that feels friendly only at first glance. Toy Chica, especially once she begins to appear without the beak in certain imagery and attack states, becomes one of the most disturbing examples of how children's character can collapse into uncanny threat. And Mangle, perhaps more than any of them, embodies breakdown at the center of attempted improvement. Mangle is particularly important because the character seems to represent both design failure and misuse. The official framing suggests that children repeatedly tore the animatronic apart, leading to its broken, reassembled, hanging limbs appearance. Whether understood literally through company negligence or symbolically as yet another example of how Fazbear Entertainment lets decay persist behind a cheerful excuse, Mangle becomes one of the most iconic, unsettling figures in the franchise. It is an animatronic visibly no longer whole, and still expected to perform. Again, classic FNaF. Something broken is not removed. It is repurposed. Now let us talk about the puppet in the FNaF 2 era, because this location makes the puppet's role feel especially central. The puppet is stored in the prize corner, contained in a music box system that must be wound. This is one of the most brilliant gameplay and lore elements in the entire series, because it turns a spiritual caretaker of the dead into something that must be actively held at bay through ritual maintenance. Win the box. Keep the puppet calm. Do not let it emerge. Mechanically, this creates tension. Symbolically, it suggests something even more haunting, that the force binding and perhaps organizing the dead children within the animatronic world is never fully at rest. The puppet does not belong to the polished corporate surface. It belongs to the wound beneath it. And in FNaF 2, that wound feels closer to the center of the building than ever. Now, the player character most commonly associated with the main knights of FNaF 2 is Jeremy Fitzgerald. Jeremy is a security guard in a much more exposed environment than the guard in FNaF 1. The office in FNaF 2 is not truly sealed by doors in the same way. Instead, survival depends on lights, a Freddy head disguise, the flashlight, and the management of multiple threats in a busier, more vulnerable space. This changes the feel of the nights significantly. The office is less bunker-like, more open, more desperate. You are not closing danger out. You are trying to convince danger to ignore you. That is a subtle but very important emotional shift. Now, FNaF 2 also gives us more direct access to the older animatronics, sometimes referred to as the withered animatronics, older versions of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, damaged and stored away, while the newer toy models take the stage. These withered versions are some of the most powerful visual storytelling devices in the franchise. Why? Because they show us history physically. They are not just old robots. They are the previous generation of haunted mascots, visibly decayed, partially dismantled, and no longer fit for public performance. Their appearance tells a story without words. The company had a past. That past became unusable, and instead of resolving it, the company moved on to newer designs. But the older ones are still there, stored away, not gone. This is deeply important to FNaF's worldview. Nothing truly leaves. It gets pushed into a parts room, covered, labeled obsolete, but it remains inside the building. And because it remains inside the building, it remains inside the haunting. This also helps explain the strange relationship between the restaurant in FNaF 2 and the later feeling decay of FNaF 1. The older animatronics are not just predecessors in a simple chronological sense. They are continuity through deterioration. The company phases designs in and out, but the dead children attached to the animatronic world do not follow brand refresh logic. They remain. Now, one of the most important lore threads tied to this era is the idea of another set of child victims, sometimes referred to by fans, through events associated with minigame imagery and additional murders beyond the earliest missing children incident. The exact sequencing and connection of all child victim sets has long been debated within the fandom, especially around which spirits occupy which animatronics and how the timelines between early and later locations overlap. But one truth remains consistent. William Afton's violence did not end with one incident. He continues to move through the system, and children continue to die. This matters because it turns Fazbear Entertainment into not just the site of one tragedy, but a repeated structure of tragedy. Each attempt to move past the past becomes contaminated by fresh violence. Each reopening carries old ghosts and creates room for new ones. The brand does not survive disaster by becoming clean. It survives by becoming layered. Now, FNaF 2 also brings the infamous concept of the bite back into the story in a different form. If the crying child tragedy is widely associated with the bite of '83, then this later restaurant era is often tied to another major bite incident, commonly called the bite of '87. This event is referenced in broader FNaF lore and became one of the earliest major mysteries players obsessed over. A frontal lobe injury, an animatronic attack, a daytime incident. Something so severe that it became part of the company's dark history and the strange practical discussions around why animatronics were no longer allowed to roam freely in certain conditions. The exact victim identity and full mechanistic details were, for a long time, heavily theorized. But in broad lore terms, the bite of '87 becomes another example of the fundamental truth of Fazbear Entertainment. Its mascots are no longer controllable enough to justify the trust placed in them. Whether through possession, malfunction, or some unstable blend of both, the company's entertainment machines have become threats to human bodies in public space. And still, the company tries to survive it. That cannot be stressed enough. A child-centered restaurant brand tied to murders, rumors, haunted behavior, and bite incidents still attempts to keep functioning. That is both darkly funny and horrifying, which is exactly why it feels so FNaF. Now we should also speak about Phone Guy in relation to this era, because his role becomes more layered when one sees the broader timeline. He exists as one of the company's lived-in voices, someone familiar with protocol, danger, and the absurdly normalized horror of the job. In FNaF 2, the calls frame the toy animatronics, the old suits, the facial recognition tech, the strange behavioral patterns, and the company's attempts to reassure through explanation. Again, he talks like this is all somehow manageable, like one can work around it, like procedures still matter. That persistent institutional tone gives the games so much of their strange humor and dread. The company never says, "This place is cursed and full of murdered children." It says, in effect, "Please follow standard procedures around the dangerous mascots." Now let us pause in the building itself. The FNaF 2 location feels brighter than the first game's setting, but not safer. Balloon decorations, children's drawings, a larger open public area, prize counters, vents, hallways, the prize corner, the stage. Everything designed for visibility and supervision. And yet, after dark, visibility becomes anxiety rather than comfort. You see more space, more angles, more places things can move. This matters because FNaF's fear is often built from surveillance. The camera should help. Instead, it only proves movement. The monitor should give control. Instead, it gives delayed knowledge. The flashlight should reveal safety. Instead, it catches threat at the edge of the beam. This is the genius of the setting. Technology does not end fear. It structures it. Now, another important figure in this period is Fritz Smith, a night guard connected to the final custom night in FNaF 2, and widely interpreted in lore discussions as potentially linked to other identities, especially Michael Afton under pseudonym theories. We will move more deeply into Michael later, because his place in the story becomes increasingly important as the games unfold. But already, the pattern is beginning. Security guards are not always random. Names shift, identities blur. Dismissals happen for suspicious reasons. Tampering with animatronics becomes part of employment records. All of this creates the feeling that human characters in FNaF are often moving through the company under partial cover, partial guilt, or partial mission. That ambiguity is important, because FNaF is full of names that are masks layered over family tragedy. Now, let us return to the puppet one more time, because the deeper you go into the series, the more it becomes clear that the puppet is not just one animatronic among many. It is almost a spiritual hinge. Charlie's death, her transformation or binding into this figure, and the puppet's association with giving life to the murdered children, means the character stands between murder and haunting, between body and machine. The puppet is sorrow institutionalized, a child trying to care for dead children from inside an object built for entertainment. That is so painful that it almost defines the emotional center of the series, and yet the company keeps operating around it, which again tells you everything about Fazbear Entertainment. By the time the FNaF 2 era reaches its end, the location is already compromised beyond saving. The toy animatronics have failed as a modern solution. The old animatronics remain in storage. The bite and the murders continue to stain the company. The restaurant is not a clean future. It is another stage in a curse. And so the business will contract. The newer location will close. The older animatronics, or some repaired version of their line, will return in a smaller scale establishment. Budgets will shrink. Optimism will dim. And we will move toward the haunted decay of FNaF 1. This progression is one of the most elegant structural movements in the lore. A brighter, newer, more advanced restaurant fails and collapses into a smaller, older-feeling, more threadbare final location. The company does not ascend into success. It retreats into survival. That retreat creates the perfect atmosphere for the original game. Now let us imagine the final days of the FNaF 2 location. A modern children's pizzeria full of cheerful signs and expensive upgrades. The toy animatronics standing polished beneath stage lights. The withered animatronics hidden away in the back like old sins. The puppet waiting behind the music box. Employees whispering about weird behavior. A bite incident shaping policy. And above all, a company realizing, perhaps dimly, that none of its attempts at redesign have actually fixed the dead. This is the essential truth. The systems change. The hauntings do not. In the next part, we will move directly into Five Nights at Freddy's 1. The late, decaying restaurant, Mike Schmidt, Phone Guy's final messages, the haunted core quartet, Golden Freddy's strange presence, and the emotional shape of the original nights that made the series legendary. For now, rest here, in the brighter restaurant that could not outrun the past, where the newer faces smile too widely, the older ones wait in darkness, and the music box keeps turning, so that grief does not stand up and walk into the hall. The brighter restaurant of the previous era has already failed. The toy animatronics, with all their polished safety language and upgraded systems, did not save the brand. The puppet still waits somewhere in the background of history. The older animatronics have not disappeared. The company has already survived too many rumors, too many injuries, too many closures, too many dead children, whose names it would rather not say aloud. And now, we arrive at the place most people first met this universe. The smaller restaurant, the dimmer halls, The office fan, the camera monitor, the doors, the phone calls in the dark. This is the world of Five Nights at Freddy's 1. There is something unforgettable about the first game's location because it feels tired. Not ancient, not theatrical, not technologically impressive. Tired. It is a place that has already outlived its own best years. A place still operating, technically, but only just. The walls are decorated, yes. The dining room still exists. The stage is still set. The mascots are still present. But the atmosphere is worn down, diminished, almost embarrassed by its own continued existence. This is one of the reasons the original game remains so powerful. It does not feel like the beginning of a grand franchise. It feels like the end of something that should already have closed. The restaurant appears to be a smaller, lower-budget continuation of the Freddy Fazbear's pizza brand. The brighter hopes of modernization have collapsed. The company has retreated back toward the older mascots, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, likely refurbished or reintroduced in some form after the failure of the newer line. The building feels like a final compromise between cost-cutting and denial. A few children may still come by day. Parties may still happen. Pizza may still be served. But after hours, the truth of the place becomes visible. Now, at the center of this chapter, stands Mike Schmidt. Mike is the night guard for the famous 5 Nights of the first game. On the surface, he appears to be a fairly ordinary employee, taking a job that is clearly not worth the pay. But as the wider lore develops, Mike becomes more complicated. Across the series, the possibility that Mike Schmidt is connected to or identical with Michael Afton becomes one of the key interpretive threads. That larger identity matters, and we will come back to it more fully later. But for now, in the world of FNaF 1, what matters is the role Mike occupies. A lone human being in a tiny office, surrounded by haunted mascots, trying to survive until morning. This structure is almost ritualistic in its simplicity. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The nights move slowly, but also not slowly at all. Every second is measured through power use, door timing, camera checks, and the uncertainty of movement in the dark. This is one of the most elegant horror designs ever made. The player is not given weapons, escape routes, or the illusion of true agency. Only systems, doors, lights, cameras, electricity. And those systems are limited. That limitation is the horror. The office itself deserves special attention because it is one of the most memorable spaces in gaming precisely due to how small it is. It is less a room of control than a box of delayed reaction. The guard sits at a desk between 2 hallways, each with a light and a security door. A monitor allows access to camera feeds around the building. A fan turns. Paper notices hang. Perhaps a cup sits on the desk. The whole thing feels ordinary in a cheap workplace way, and yet this ordinary little office becomes a kind of chapel of dread, a place where the player listens, watches, waits, and performs a nightly ritual against things that should not be walking at all. Now let us speak about Phone Guy, because in FNaF 1, he becomes one of the most important atmospheric devices in the entire series. Phone Guy is not dramatic. He is not presented like a prophet or a villain. He is just a recorded voice from previous nights, a familiar employee explaining procedures, expectations, and workplace oddities. And that is exactly why he works so well. He makes the nightmare sound routine. This is one of the deepest uncanny effects in all of FNaF. The voice on the phone is calm, a little awkward maybe, trying to sound helpful, trying to reassure. And through that calmness, the player receives one of the strangest workplace orientations ever imagined. The animatronics move at night. That is normal, apparently. They may mistake a human being for an endoskeleton without a costume. That is unfortunate, apparently. They may try to force that human into a mascot suit, killing them in the process. That is framed almost like a policy concern. Everything about this explanation is absurd, and everything about it is terrifying, because the company language treats lethal horror like manageable inconvenience. Phone Guy is the perfect voice of Fazbear Entertainment's deeper moral failure. He is not malicious in the grand William Afton sense. He does not seem to be the source of the evil, but he is normalized inside it. He speaks as someone long accustomed to the impossible. That makes him tragic in his own way. And as the nights progress, his own fate becomes one of the most chilling parts of the game, because the player is not listening to generic training material. The player is listening to a man who has already been here, who already knows too much, and who will not survive. Now, the animatronic quartet of FNaF1 must be understood not only as antagonists, but as the purest iconic expression of the franchise's central wound. Freddy Fazbear is the star, the face, the center. He moves more slowly, more strategically, more symbolically than some of the others. Freddy is not always the first threat felt in the original nights, but he becomes one of the most psychologically significant. He represents the building itself, the brand itself, the smiling bear whose image covered the truth of murdered children. There is something deeply wrong about Freddy's patience. He does not always rush. He advances, he watches, he waits. That makes him feel less like a mere machine and more like the restaurant's conscience darkened into presence. Bonnie is often the first major pressure the player feels. There is something invasive about Bonnie's movement pattern in the original game, the rabbit appearing closer and closer, occupying doorways, forcing immediate reaction. Bonnie breaks space in a very direct way. The rabbit who should have been cheerful becomes the first intimate threat. Chica carries a slightly different kind of wrongness. In the first game, Chica's presence, especially in windows and doorways, feels empty-eyed in a particularly disturbing way. The bib, the face, the shape, all of it is built for childish friendliness, and all of it becomes uncanny when animated by restlessness and spiritual confusion. Foxy in Pirate Cove is one of the greatest suspense devices in horror game design. Foxy is not just another moving figure on cameras. Foxy is anticipation behind a curtain. The idea that you must keep checking a pirate cove so the hidden thing does not run at you across the hall is almost dreamlike in its strange logic. Foxy represents the fear of what gathers momentum in secrecy, and then, standing almost outside the ordinary rules of the game, is Golden Freddy. Golden Freddy is one of the most important figures in FNaF myth, because even he, in the original game's simpler presentation, the character already feels wrong in a different category. Golden Freddy appears not like a standard animatronic moving through space, but like a rupture, a sloped suit, a strange apparition, a symbol of a death not properly processed by the system. Golden Freddy does not remain hot. Golden Freddy interrupts reality. The screen changes, the atmosphere shifts, the logic of the building breaks. This is why Golden Freddy has always felt so central to the deeper meaning. The figure does not behave like a standard haunted mascot. It behaves like trauma itself becoming visible. Now let us think carefully about what the original Five Nights mean in the larger timeline. At first, the story seems simple. A security guard survives haunted robots in a failing restaurant. But in truth, these nights are one of the real completion points of the entire series. Inside them are the missing children incident,
The company covered up the spiritual unrest of murdered children, the continued consequences of many actors' actions, the economic decline of Freddy's Get Total, the emotional weight of the horror restaurants and murder families. Fright, as the horror looks like the rise of the world, and the murder of the first film. This gives the game its peculiar silver.
That is one of the reasons the game feels almost meditative when separated from its jump scares. The same halls, the same checks, the same hours. It is like watching guilt pace in a cage. Now, the player receives the famous paycheck at the end of the week, a darkly funny reminder that all of this still exists under the logic of employment. The horror is processed through workplace completion. Survive long enough, and you are compensated, however absurdly. This is another reason Fazbear Entertainment works so well as a fictional company. It keeps reducing spiritual disaster into administrative procedure. Even death becomes scheduling. As for Mike, the end-of-week implications and later identity theories matter because they suggest the night guard may not be random after all. If Mike Schmidt is indeed a name used by Michael Afton, then the original game gains another emotional layer. It is no longer just a man working a cursed job. It becomes a son moving through the aftermath of his father's crimes, perhaps trying to understand, survive, or undo something within the very system his family helped poison. This possibility casts the nights in a different light. The office becomes not just employment, but inheritance. And inheritance is one of FNaF's greatest themes. Children inherit rooms. Families inherit guilt. Companies inherit blood. Animatronics inherit souls. Nothing begins clean. Now, Phone Guy's final recorded message is one of the most unforgettable tonal moments in the game. It is the point where the institutional voice that has been guiding and normalizing the player's experience collapses. The familiar calm breaks. Sounds intrude. Fear becomes audible. By the time the player hears that message, the implication is devastatingly simple. The routine did not save him either. This matters enormously. It confirms that the office is not manageable in any lasting sense. One can survive a night, perhaps several, but the system does not end. The thing in the building remains, and those who become too familiar with it are not spared by familiarity. Now let us look one more time at the restaurant itself. The dining area is empty. The tables stand under weak light. The stage curtains are still. Posters smile from the walls. The kitchen is unseen. Hall corners hold darkness deeper than they should. The back rooms hold old secrets. And in the office, a single human being uses up battery power, trying to keep out the dead. This is FNaF at its purest. Not lore complexity at maximum. Not underground sci-fi at maximum. Not family revelation at maximum. Just the essential image. A children's restaurant after closing. And things that should not move, moving. But in the larger timeline, these nights are not the whole story. They are one layer. The visible surface of an older machine. To understand William Afton more fully, to understand Michael, to understand the underground facilities, the remnant experiments, the sister location era, and the eventual burning attempts to end it all, we must keep going deeper, because the original game is only what happens when the curse is already old. In the next part, we will move below the surface, into sister location, the Afton family in greater depth, Circus Baby, Elizabeth Afton, the underground facility, and the increasingly direct revelation that William Afton's crimes were not only murder inside restaurants, but part of a much larger and more personal machinery of horror. For now, rest here, in the old office with the fan turning softly, where the phone has already rung, the doors are draining power, the cameras show only fragments, and the children inside the mascots keep walking the same halls because no one ever told them the night was over. The old restaurant is behind us for the moment. The office fan has gone quiet. The phone calls have already become memory. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy still stand at the center of the haunting mythology. But the deeper we go into Five Nights at Freddy's, the more we realize that the restaurants were never the whole story. They were the surface. Below them, beneath the brand, beneath the public-facing mascots and party rooms, there were other rooms, other machines, other plans, and other children. This is where the series changes shape again. No longer only the dim pizzeria after midnight. Now we descend into hidden facilities, advanced animatronics, family tragedy, secret experiments, and the increasingly direct revelation that William Afton's evil was not just opportunistic murder inside family restaurants. It was systematic, designed, layered, and horrifyingly intimate. This is the era of Five Nights at Freddy's, Sister Location. Sister Location is one of the most important chapters in the whole timeline because it recontextualizes William Afton in a much larger way. In the earlier games, Afton can seem like a killer using mascots and spaces to commit crimes. In Sister Location, the story suggests something even darker, that he was building machines for the purpose of control, capture, and death. That changes everything. The animatronics of this era are not simply stage performers that later become haunted. Many of them feel dangerous by design, and at the center of this terrifying shift stands one of the most important characters in the entire franchise, Circus Baby. Now, Circus Baby is one of the series' greatest creations because she combines so many of FNaF's strongest themes at once. She is child-focused entertainment. She is a machine with a smiling face. She is theatrical. She is elegant in a strange, polished way. And she is deeply tied to the Afton family's most intimate tragedy. Circus Baby belongs to a group of animatronics associated with Circus Baby's Pizza World, and later the underground operation of Circus Baby's entertainment and rental. These characters include Baby, Ballora, Funtime Freddy, Funtime Foxy, and others, a cast that feels more advanced, more specialized, and more unsettlingly engineered than the earlier Pizzeria mascots. They are brighter, more polished, more segmented, more expressive, and more dangerous. There is a cleanness to the Funtime animatronics that makes them eerie in a different way from the older cast. Freddy and Bonnie and Chica feel worn, heavy, haunted by years. The Funtimes feel surgical, controlled, almost medical in their segmented precision. Their endoskeleton structure, faceplates, hidden compartments, and voice programming all suggest technology that has moved beyond public entertainment into something more secretive and instrument-like. This is not accidental. Circus Baby, especially, is tied directly to William Afton's private horror. One of the defining tragedies of Sister Location is the fate of Elizabeth Afton, William's daughter. Elizabeth is central because she brings the story's emotional pain directly into the Afton family. Until this stage, William's murders are largely focused outward. He kills other children, he destroys other families, but now the machinery he created turns inward. Elizabeth is drawn to Circus Baby. This is such a painful element of the story, because children in FNaF are always drawn toward the thing that will destroy them. The world is built to attract them. That is what the mascots are for. Bright colors, songs, stage presence, wonder, all of it is a lure. And in this case, the child is not only any child, but William's own daughter. William warns Elizabeth to stay away from Baby. That warning is one of the most chilling details in the whole timeline. It implies knowledge. It implies intent. It implies that he knows something about the machine's danger, because he designed it that way. The father who warns the child is the same father who built the thing worth fearing. And of course, Elizabeth does not stay away. She approaches Circus Baby. She is alone with her, and Baby kills her. This is one of the purest FNaF tragedies because it contains so many contradictions at once. A father warning against the danger he created, a child drawn toward a machine made to delight children, death occurring not in open violence, but in private mechanical concealment, love, warning, and monstrosity all tangled together in one moment. Elizabeth's spirit becomes associated with Circus Baby, and that changes Baby forever. Like the earlier haunted animatronics, Baby becomes more than machinery. But Baby is different. She is articulate, self-aware in an unusually direct way, and emotionally layered. She is not merely aggressive or confused. She can speak. She can manipulate. She can remember. She can explain. In her, the line between animatronic and possessed self becomes more psychologically active than before. This is why Baby is so fascinating. She is tragic because she contains Elizabeth. She is frightening because she does not speak only like Elizabeth. She is a fusion of child, machine, and something learned in the dark. Now we must speak more clearly about William Afton in this era. By the time Sister Location becomes relevant, Afton is no longer simply a hidden killer in retro minigame fragments. His presence is becoming clearer as an inventor, manipulator, father, and architect of layered suffering. He is tied to Afton Robotics, to underground facilities, to advanced animatronic lines, and to experiments or systems that suggest he is interested not only in murder, but in what comes after it. This brings us toward one of the most mysterious ideas in later FNaF lore: Remnant. Remnant is one of those FNaF concepts that feels half supernatural and half pseudoscientific, which is exactly why it fits the series so well. Broadly understood, Remnant is connected to the idea that emotional energy, life, suffering, and soul-like presence can be bound into metal or machines in a more deliberate way. It is part of the bridge between ghost story and machine story. William Afton's growing interest in possession and spiritual persistence suggests that he is no longer merely killing for impulse or secrecy. He is studying. He is exploiting. He may be trying to understand how life persists in machinery. That possibility makes him even more monstrous, because now the murders are not only acts of cruelty, they are data points, experiments, and the family restaurant world becomes a laboratory of dead children. Now, Sister Location introduces us much more directly to Michael Afton. Michael is one of the most important figures in the whole series because he seems to become the central wandering inheritor of the family's curse. Across different names, jobs, and locations, Michael is often interpreted as the one sent into the machinery, the son dealing with the consequences of William's crimes. If Mike Schmidt and possibly Fritz Smith point toward Michael under aliases, then Sister Location makes his role much more explicit. He is sent underground. He works through nights. He listens to instructions. He moves through maintenance rooms, control systems, private chambers, and performance spaces. And all the while, He is moving deeper into the place where his father's private horrors have been stored. This is where Sister Location's setting matters so much. Unlike the restaurants, which are public spaces turned haunted, the underground facility is hidden from the beginning. It is secret before it is supernatural. It belongs to the architecture of concealment. Elevators descend. Voice systems guide you. Rooms are compartmentalized. Animatronics are rented out or maintained in controlled cycles. The whole place feels like a corporate lab wrapped in performance language. Again, classic FNaF. Entertainment is the mask. Machinery is the truth. Michael's path through this place brings him into direct contact with Baby and the other Funtime animatronics, whose personalities and intentions are far more verbalized than in the earlier games. They are not merely moving silently through halls. They speak. They scheme. They understand things. They want things. And one of the things they want is escape. This leads us to one of the most grotesque and unforgettable concepts in all of FNaF lore, Ennard. Ennard is not a single simple character in origin, but a fused entity, formed from the internal structures and intentions of multiple animatronics. It is one of the clearest expressions of the series' body horror side. Wires, masks, parts, voices, and identities are all tangled together. Ennard wants to leave the underground facility. To do that, it needs a human disguise. And Michael becomes that disguise. This is one of the most horrifying events in the series. Michael is effectively used as a skin suit, a hollowed body worn by Ennard in order to escape into the outside world. The imagery here is deeply disturbing. But what matters most in lore terms is the emotional and symbolic meaning. The Afton son is literally emptied out and used by the machinery his father created. There may be no more fitting image for inherited family horror than that. He becomes a vessel, a shell, a body carrying the thing his father built. And yet, in one of the strangest turns in the entire franchise, Michael does not fully die in the ordinary way. After Ennard eventually abandons his decaying body, Michael rises again. This is a crucial moment. He is changed, possibly sustained by Remnant, or by the strange spiritual biological logic of the series. No longer fully living in a normal sense, but still moving, still speaking, still pursuing purpose. This makes Michael one of the saddest figures in FNaF. He is not a triumphant hero. He is a damaged continuation, a son carrying death inside and still walking. Now, if Michael's survival after this horror is real in the broad lore, then it transforms his role in the entire timeline. He becomes not just a guard or witness, but a persistent seeker, someone trying to find his father. Someone trying to undo or at least follow the path of the crimes. Someone moving from one cursed location to another because the family story has made any normal life impossible. That is important. Because from this point onward, the Afton family becomes less like background explanation and more like the emotional spine of the series. Let us name them again for clarity. William Afton, the father, murderer, engineer, hidden architect of ruin. Elizabeth Afton, the daughter, lost to Circus Baby, the crying child, tied to the earliest family sorrow and fear. Michael Afton, the son moving through the aftermath, trying perhaps to find, survive, and finally end what the father began. This family structure matters because it makes FNaF more than an anthology of haunted restaurants. It becomes a domestic tragedy stretched across corporate spaces and machines. The brand is not random to Afton. It is his instrument. His family is not outside the horror. They are inside it. Now, the animatronics of Sister Location each deepen the unsettling tone in different ways. Ballora carries a strangely mournful elegance, almost dancer-like, graceful but eerie, associated by some interpretations with maternal echoes or emotional textures within the Afton family story. Funtime Freddy is loud, fractured, theatrical, almost manic in contrast to the more subdued dread of the older animatronics. Funtime Foxy adds another polished predator energy to the underground cast, but Baby remains the emotional and narrative center, because Baby can speak to Michael, because Baby remembers enough to sound personal, because Baby is Elizabeth and not Elizabeth at the same time, and because Baby's existence proves that William Afton's crimes have entered his own bloodline in irreversible form. Now let us think about the underground facility as an image, an elevator descending below the world. Bright instructional voices over hidden dread, stage rooms without audiences, maintenance corridors, control modules, observatory windows, a child entertainer, animatronic, standing still under a spotlight in an empty chamber. This is one of the great FNaF spaces because it makes the secret literal. We are no longer inferring from pizzeria scraps. We are underground, where the company and the family kept their true work. And once we have gone there, the earlier restaurants can never feel simple again. In the next part, we will move into what happens when William Afton himself becomes trapped by the machinery and haunting he helped create, the events surrounding the old suits, the dismantling of animatronics, the Springlock failure, and the birth of one of the most iconic nightmare forms in the series, Springtrap. For now, rest here, deep below the surface, where the stage lights shine with no audience. The machines speak softly in the dark, and the children of one family are already being folded, one by one, into the same terrible inheritance. We have moved beneath the restaurants. We have seen the hidden machinery. We have watched the Afton family become inseparable from the horror William helped create. Elizabeth has already been taken into Circus Baby. Michael has already become a wandering survivor of impossible things. The early restaurants have already accumulated death, memory, and haunted mascots. And now, the story turns inward on William Afton himself. This is one of the most important turns in the entire Five Nights at Freddy's mythos. Because until now, Afton has largely existed as the poison behind the curtain, the unseen killer, the engineer of horrors, the man behind the uniform, the mascot, the company systems, and the dead children hidden in machines. But in this next phase, the structure he built begins to close around him. And eventually, he becomes trapped, not merely by ghosts in a general sense, but by the very logic of the world he helped create. This is the road to Springtrap. Now, one of the key ideas we need to understand here is what happens after the original restaurant eras begin to decay and close. Fazbear Entertainment keeps failing, reopening, shrinking, rebranding, and leaving behind old locations like husks. But the animatronics do not simply stop mattering when a building is abandoned. Their haunted condition, and the unresolved violence tied to them, remains active in the world. At some point in this later haunted aftermath, William Afton returns to one of the old, abandoned Freddy Fazbear locations. This is a profoundly important image. The killer coming back. The restaurant empty. No children. No music. No employees. No cheerful surface left. Only the shell. This is where FNaF becomes almost ritual in its storytelling. The place of old crime, once full of laughter and branding, is now silent enough that the buried truth can finally move. William begins dismantling the old animatronics. This matters for several reasons. First, it shows that he is not merely hiding from the past. He is actively trying to interfere with it again. Whether he intends to destroy evidence, harvest parts, study remnant, or remove threats, the act of dismantling is incredibly symbolic. He is tearing apart the very machines that hold the dead children he murdered. Second, the sequence gives us one of the most important visual and emotional moments in the series, the children's spirits appearing around him once the animatronics are broken. This is crucial. The haunting is no longer subtle, no longer just implied through movement and weird nighttime behavior. The dead are here, and they recognize him. This is one of the deepest truths of FNaF. William Afton can hide from authorities, from companies, from employees, from public suspicion. But he cannot hide forever from the children. That reckoning finally arrives. Now, in fear, panic, or desperate instinct, William does something that reflects both irony and doom. He hides inside one of the old Springlock suits. And not just anyone. He hides in Spring Bonnie. This is such a perfectly cruel moment in the series because the suit itself is deeply tied to the earliest era of the story. The old hybrid costume technology, dangerous from the beginning, returns at the exact moment William most wants protection. He chooses the mascot shell as refuge. He goes back inside the mechanism, and the mechanism fails. This failure is one of the defining events in all of Five Nights at Freddy's. The spring locks snap. The internal parts collapse inward. Metal, mechanisms, and costume structure crush into his body. William is mortally injured, perhaps in ordinary human terms, killed, by the very kind of device that had always contained hidden violence beneath cheerful performance. This is poetic in the darkest possible way. The murderer dies inside the mascot. The man who used suits and animatronics as instruments of death becomes trapped inside one. The machine that symbolized concealment becomes a coffin. But of course, this is FNaF. Death is not the end. William does not leave. He remains inside the suit, and over time, he becomes known as Springtrap. Springtrap is one of the most iconic images in horror gaming because the design embodies so much of the series at once. Old mascot costume, exposed endoskeleton visible rot, mechanical failure corpse and machine fuse together a grin that is no longer performance but decay. Springtrap is not just Afton as a monster. He is the whole moral structure of FNaF made physical. The killer, the suit, the haunted restaurant, the failed mechanism, the long passage of time, and the refusal of death to finish its work. All of it is there in one body. That is why Springtrap matters so much. He is not a twist. He is a conclusion, or at least, he feels like one. Now let us linger for a moment in the atmosphere of the abandoned location where this happens. Dust, dark rooms, broken arcade cabinets, collapsed ceilings, the stage long silent, the old animatronics dismantled, rain perhaps outside, or just the thick stillness of neglect. And in a back room, the old Spring Bonnie suit standing as it always did, like a relic from the first era. William steps inside. The locks fail, and the room becomes the site where the series' hidden murderer is transformed into its most unforgettable corpse machine. This is one of the places where FNaF's mixture of supernatural and mechanical horror is perfect. A ghost story alone would make his punishment symbolic. A machine failure story alone would make it ironic. But together, with the spirits of murdered children driving him into that suit, it becomes something much deeper. Justice, in this universe, is never clean. It is entangled. Now, after this transformation, time passes. A great deal of time, in fact. And this passage of time is important because Springtrap is not immediately discovered in some obvious, well-lit, publicly acknowledged way. He remains hidden in the ruins, decaying inside the sealed suit, preserved in a state that is neither ordinary death nor ordinary life. This gives him a mythic quality. He is an artifact of unresolved evil buried in the leftovers of the company's old crimes. And then the world, in typical FNaF fashion, decides to commercialize the past again. This brings us to Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction. Fazbear's Fright is one of the series' most darkly funny and unsettling concepts. Decades after the original restaurant tragedies, people decide to build a horror attraction based on the urban legends and rumors surrounding Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. In other words, the company, or people adjacent to the brand's legacy, turns real suffering into themed entertainment. This is extremely FNaF. The truth becomes marketable. The trauma becomes nostalgia. The murders become spooky branding. And inside this attraction, scavenged items from the old locations are collected to create atmosphere. Old props, old masks, old arcade remnants, old suit pieces, old stories. The past is being staged. But unlike ordinary horror attractions, this one eventually finds the real thing. Springtrap is discovered and brought in. This is one of the most chilling story developments in the whole franchise because the attraction believes it has found the perfect prop. What it has actually done is retrieve William Afton himself, a real corpse fused into a real mascot suit from a real history of murder. And instead of understanding what they have uncovered, they place him in the attraction as a centerpiece. It is absurd, horrific, and absolutely perfect for this universe. Now, we move into the era of Five Nights at Freddy's 3. The player character here works security in Fazbear's Fright, monitoring old systems, hallucination-inducing sounds and visuals, ventilation problems, and the one real threat among many false ones, Springtrap. This is such a brilliant inversion of earlier games. In the first game, multiple haunted animatronics move against the player. In FNaF 3, many of the surrounding presences are phantom-like, visual and audio distortions, fragments of memory and fear. But the true physical threat is singular, Springtrap. The murderer has become the monster, and he walks. This matters enormously, because now the haunting is no longer just dead children inside mascots. It includes the continued existence of William Afton in punished but persistent form. He is still dangerous, still moving, still impossible to finish. Springtrap's behavior in FNaF 3 carries a strange quality. He is not loud in the way of many horror figures. He feels deliberate, stalking, worn but active. The rot and suit damage do not make him pathetic. They make him ancient, like a crime that has survived long enough to become structure. This is one of the reasons FNaF 3 feels so different in tone. The horror attraction setting adds layers of theatricality, fake scares, ambient props, and nostalgia built from the old brand. But at the center is something real, and that real thing changes the atmosphere entirely. The player is no longer dealing only with lingering spiritual echoes. They are dealing with William's continued existence. Now, FNaF 3 also becomes important because it introduces the possibility of release through the famous hidden minigame logic, often interpreted as the path toward the good ending. Through symbolic minigame sequences, the children's spirits can be guided, masks can be laid to rest, and the possibility arises that some of the dead children may finally move on. This matters because FNaF is not only about endless haunting, it is also about whether the haunting can ever stop. Can the dead be freed? Can the children leave the suits? Can the cycle be broken? FNaF 3 suggests, at least in one interpretive layer, that some kind of release is possible. But William Afton is not finished. and Fazbear's Fright itself burns. This is another recurring pattern in the series. When a location becomes too full of truth, fire arrives. Fire as destruction. Fire as attempted cleansing. Fire as narrative closure. The attraction catches fire, and for a moment, one might think that perhaps Springtrap is finally gone. But he is not. Of course he is not. He survives. This survival is essential to understanding why William Afton becomes such a persistent figure in the later lore. He is not simply the man who murdered children. He is the one who keeps remaining after he should have ended. Fire does not erase him. Time does not erase him. The company's collapses do not erase him. He becomes the franchise's embodiment of corruption, refusing conclusion. Now let us pause and think carefully about the emotional meaning of Springtrap. He is ugly, yes. Decay-covered, yes. A corpse in a suit, yes. But more than that, he is a paradox. He is William punished, but not absent. He is trapped, but still active. He is a consequence that also remains a cause. And because of that, he turns every later attempt at resolution into something unstable. If William is still here, then perhaps the past is not done. If the murderer still walks, then perhaps no fire has been enough. This is why later games will keep circling him, transforming him, recontextualizing him, and trying again and again to end what he represents. But before we reach those endings, we need one more thing: a clearer understanding of the one trying to finish this story from the moral side. And that brings us back toward Henry Emily. Because if William is the poison that keeps surviving, Henry becomes, in the later timeline, the man trying to finally gather the poison into one place and burn it. But that is for the next part. For now, let us rest in this strange middle age of the series, an abandoned room where the killer dies inside the mascot, a horror attraction built from lies and legends, a single real monster moving through fake haunted halls. Children may be finding release in fragments of hidden games, and a fire rising again, trying to do what institutions, police, brands, and time all failed to do. In the next part, we will move toward FNaF 6/Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, Henry's final plan, Michael's role, the gathering of Baby, Molten Freddy, Lefty, and Springtrap, and the great attempt to end the story through one final burning. For now, rest here, inside the horror attraction after closing, where fake cobwebs hang beside real history. The hall smells faintly of dust and wiring, and somewhere in the dark, the man who caused so much of this is still walking in the suit that finally refused to let him out. The old murderer has already been trapped inside a suit. The horror attraction has already tried to turn history into entertainment. The fire has already risen once and failed to truly finish what it touched. William Afton, as Springtrap, still persists. The animatronic world is still full of restless remnants. The dead children may have moved closer to release in some ways, but the system that held them has not yet been fully gathered into one final answer. And now, at last, the story begins to bend toward one of its most deliberate and emotionally important endings, or at least one of its greatest attempts at an ending. This is the era of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, often understood as FNaF 6. Now, one of the reasons this game matters so much is that it feels, in structure and intention, like a trap, not only for the player, for the whole story. The setup is deceptively simple. A small pizzeria, management choices, tasks, salvage sequences, business-like procedures, a return, in some sense, to the language of restaurant operation. The whole thing feels almost absurdly modest after everything the timeline has already become. And that modesty is the disguise. Because beneath the surface, Henry Emily is building one final machine of closure. We have spoken of Henry before, the quieter figure, the builder, the engineer, the father whose daughter Charlie was among the earliest and most central losses in the saga. Henry has always felt like the shadow opposite of William Afton. If William turns creativity into murder, Henry once tried to turn it into joy. If William hides inside systems, Henry understands systems well enough to finally use one against him. This is what makes Henry so important in the late story. He is not merely another victim. He is the one who finally decides that the cycle must be ended, not by another reopening, not by another hiding of evidence, not by another half measure, but by gathering everything into one place and burning it all. There is something deeply moving about that, because Henry's plan is not vengeful in a loud, theatrical way. It is sorrowful, measured, deliberate. He speaks and acts like a man who has carried grief for too long and has finally accepted that only total destruction will stop the machinery built around it. The pizzeria of this era is therefore not really a business in the ordinary sense. It is bait. A false ordinary place meant to attract the last active horrors still moving through the timeline. And among those horrors are some of the most important late-stage forms of the series. Let us begin with Scrap Baby. Circus Baby, already tragic and dangerous through her connection to Elizabeth Afton, has moved through several transformations by this point. After the fragmentation of Enard and the later separations among the fused animatronic identities, Baby emerges in a more altered, scavenged, self-reassembled form often called Scrap Baby. This version of her feels less polished than the underground entertainer, more raw, more visibly cobbled together, and perhaps more openly aligned with survival and manipulation. But emotionally, what matters is this. Elizabeth is still here in some broken sense, still inside the machine, still tangled in her father's legacy, still not free. That is heartbreaking, because even after all this time, all this damage, all these transformations, she remains part of the same poisoned family story. Then there is Molten Freddy. Molten Freddy represents the continued twisted existence of what was once Enard after internal division and reconfiguration. Wires, masks, voices, and tangled animatronic remnants continue in a new shape, grotesque and unstable. If Baby represents one branch of the family tragedy still trying to speak, Molten Freddy represents the wider, fused leftovers of the underground animatronic nightmare still writhing in search of continuation. This matters because it shows how FNaF's horrors rarely die neatly. They break apart, recombine, survive in changed form. The story is full of entities that are not singular anymore. They are accumulations of pain and machinery. Now we come to one of the most important figures in this final trap, Lefty. Lefty is a strange and brilliant creation in the lore because it is not simply another mascot variant. Lefty is a containment design. Its purpose is tied directly to capturing and holding the puppet, and therefore Charlie. This means Lefty is not just another monster wandering into the final pizzeria. It is a cage. This detail is emotionally devastating. Charlie, who as the puppet became so central to the binding and protection of the dead children, is still active enough that she must be brought into the final gathering too. Henry knows this. He understands that she cannot simply be left wandering in her old, half-afterlife role. If the fire is to free anyone, it must include her as well. And then, of course, there is Springtrap. Or more precisely by this point, a later damaged continuation often called Scrap Trap, reflecting design shifts but still unmistakably William Afton trapped in the ruin of Spring Bonnie. He comes too. because of course he does. The old murderer always returns to the center eventually. No version of ending can matter if it does not include him. This is what Henry understands. It is not enough to destroy buildings, not enough to close restaurants, not enough to let time pass. The central poison must be brought into the fire knowingly. Now, the player character in Pizzeria Simulator is widely understood to be Michael Afton. This is enormously important. If true in the broad intended reading, and the later speech structures and narrative positioning make that the strongest interpretation, then Michael has become the final human thread holding together the whole family tragedy. He is the son who kept walking after death should have stopped him, the son who moved through restaurants, facilities, and haunted systems, the son searching, perhaps, for his father, the son carrying guilt, whether for his younger brother, for his family, or simply for surviving all of it. And now, at the end, Michael is in the pizzeria too. This is one of the reasons the final fire matters so much. It is not just a cleansing of monsters. It is a gathering of a family destroyed by William Afton's choices. Father, daughter, son, and all around them, the wider machinery of murdered children, haunted mascots, trapped spirits, and artificial continuation. Henry's Pizzeria is thus less a restaurant than a ritual chamber built in the language of franchise management. Salvage procedures become invitations. The building becomes a net. The business front becomes the mask for execution. This is such a perfect FNaF ending structure because it uses the company's own logic against itself. Another pizzeria, another reopening, another small operation. Except this time, someone behind it actually understands what the brand has always concealed. Now, the salvage segments in the game are especially important atmospherically. The animatronics arrive one by one as damaged, unstable figures, and the player performs assessments in conditions of tension and controlled observation. These moments feel like the series quietly acknowledging its own monsters in turn, asking us to sit in the room with them and understand that each is not just a scare device, but a residue of a longer history. Baby is not just an enemy, she is Elizabeth. Molten Freddy is not just a beast, it is accumulated suffering and leftover identity. Lefty is not just a suit, it contains Charlie. Springtrap is not just an animatronic, it is William Afton refusing death. One by one, they are brought in. One by one, Henry's plan closes around them. And then comes one of the greatest speeches in the entire franchise. Henry speaks. His final monologue is one of the emotional and philosophical high points of Five Nights at Freddy's because it does something rare for the series. It stops hiding for a moment. The story that spent so long in clues, fragments, mini-games, implied tragedies, and visual riddles suddenly allows a deeply human voice to step forward and name what is happening. He speaks to the gathered souls, to Elizabeth, to Charlie, to the monsters, to William, and to the one he clearly knows is there by choice, Michael. The beauty of Henry's speech lies in its sadness. He does not sound triumphant. He sounds tired, loving, grieving, certain only because uncertainty has already caused too much suffering. He understands that some of the beings in the fire are victims. He understands that some were manipulated, trapped, or twisted. He understands that his own daughter has carried too much for too long, and so he offers something close to release. Not rescue in life, release in death. That is why the speech matters so much. It frames the fire not only as punishment, but as mercy. For Charlie, who was never supposed to carry the dead forever. For the children, who should not have remained bound to machines. For Michael, if he truly stayed in the building to help end it. and perhaps even in a much darker sense for Elizabeth, who was caught in her father's machinery far too young. William, of course, is addressed differently. For him, the fire is not peaceful release. It is judgment. Henry knows who he is, knows what he did, knows how many times he survived what should have ended him. And at last, Henry builds a system designed not to let him slip away again. This is one of the most important emotional distinctions in the whole ending. Not everyone in the fire is there for the same reason. Some are there to be freed. One is there to be stopped. That difference gives the ending moral shape. Now let us imagine the pizzeria in its final minutes. The cheerful surface already thin. The restaurant closed. The walls no longer relevant as decor. Inside, all the old pieces have been gathered. Michael is there. Baby is there. Molten Freddy is there. Lefty with the puppet inside is there. Afton is there. Henry's voice comes through. And beneath the floor and within the structure, the fire begins. This is the great attempted ending of the classic FNaF story. A pizzeria becomes a pyre. A franchise becomes a tomb. A brand built on mascots and children's joy finally becomes what it had always secretly been, a machine of death set on fire from within. It is beautiful in the darkest possible way, and for a moment, it feels final. So many strands are here. Henry and William Charlie and the puppet Elizabeth and baby Michael and the family burden the haunted leftovers of the underground facility. The company's repeated reopenings ending in one sealed trap. It feels like closure, and in many emotional ways, it is. But Five Nights at Freddy's is not a series that stays buried easily. The fire happens, the speech is given, the trap closes, and still, some things remain possible, because William Afton's persistence has become almost metaphysical by this stage. He is no longer merely a man in a suit. He is a pattern of corruption that keeps trying to survive form changes, buildings, decay, and fire. This is why later chapters will continue to circle him in new shapes and digital forms. Still, even if later lore complicates finality, the ending of Pizzeria Simulator remains profoundly important. It is the moment where the series most clearly says, "This should have been enough," and that should carries enormous emotional weight. Henry gave the story what institutions never did: recognition, moral clarity, and a deliberate attempt to stop the cycle at its source. Let us pause here and feel the grief of this ending. A father speaking to a daughter he lost long ago. A son staying in the fire because there is nowhere else meaningful left for him to go. A dead child still trapped inside a clown-faced machine. A murderer finally cornered not by police or chance, but by someone who truly understood the architecture of his crimes. A restaurant burning not for insurance, not for scandal control, but because mercy and judgment require the same flame. This is one of the reasons FNaF 6 matters so much. It is the soul of the old story trying to end itself with dignity. In the next part, we will move into what came after: Ultimate Custom Night, the idea of endless punishment, the lingering afterlife of William Afton's suffering, and then the transformation of the series into its newer era of digital hauntings: Glitchtrap, Help Wanted, Security Breach, and the question of whether evil in this universe can ever truly stop changing form. For now, rest here, in the final pizzeria after the closing speech, where the lights have gone out, the exits no longer matter, and the fire rises softly through the walls as if the whole long story is trying, at last, to put its dead to sleep. The fire has already happened. Henry has already spoken. Michael has already remained in the building. Charlie, Elizabeth, Molten Freddy, and William Afton have all been gathered into the same last trap beneath the language of one final pizzeria. And for a moment, perhaps one of the most powerful moments in the whole series, it felt as if the story had reached its proper end. The children would be free. The machines would burn. The father who poisoned everything would finally be unable to escape. That is what the ending of Pizzeria Simulator promised. And yet, Five Nights at Freddy's is not only a story about death, it is a story about persistence. Memory persists. Pain persists. Patterns persist. And William Afton, more than anyone, becomes the embodiment of something in this universe that refuses to remain contained by ordinary endings. This brings us first to one of the strangest and most fascinating spaces in the entire franchise: Ultimate Custom Night. Now, Ultimate Custom Night is a curious thing in the broader mythology because it can be approached as gameplay challenge, as metaspace, and as lore space all at once. But one of the strongest and most emotionally resonant interpretations is that it represents some form of Afton's punishment, a looping, torment-filled afterstate where he is held in endless suffering by a vengeful spirit. This is important because it changes the meaning of death again. If the fire of Pizzeria Simulator was meant to be judgment, then Ultimate Custom Night suggests that judgment did not simply erase William, it trapped him. Again, but not inside a mascot, inside repetition. And repetition, of course, has always been one of FNaF's deepest structures. Night after night, room after room, shift after shift, system after system. Now that same looping logic becomes the murderer's prison. He faces animatronics and entities from across the franchise in a kind of endless cycle, and hovering over this interpretation is one of the most important late myth ideas in FNaF, the one you should not have killed. This phrase, and the spirit behind it, became one of the great mysteries and obsessions of the fandom. It suggests that one of William's victims, often strongly associated in interpretation with Golden Freddy or the spirit known as Cassidy, is not ready to let him go, not ready to allow death to become release, not ready to end the suffering. This is one of the darkest moral turns in the entire saga. Because the dead child is no longer seeking only freedom, the dead child may be seeking vengeance, and not in a symbolic way, in an active way. Afton, who denied rest to so many others, is denied rest himself. This is thematically perfect, and yet it is also sad, because FNaF's dead are never allowed simple peace. Even justice, when it comes, is tangled in agony. The series understands that unresolved suffering does not produce clean moral architecture. It produces loops, echoes, endless nights. Now, if Ultimate Custom Night reflects Afton's punishment, then it would be tempting to imagine that as the final endpoint of his story. But Five Nights at Freddy's does not remain still. The series changes again, and with that change, the horror leaves old restaurants and old fires and enters something new. This is the age of digital haunting. This is Help Wanted. Now, Five Nights at Freddy's. Help Wanted is vital because it reframes the entire franchise in a wonderfully strange way. Within its story, Fazbear Entertainment attempts to rebrand again, because of course it does. The company, now fully aware that it is surrounded by rumors, urban legends, and a dark reputation, decides to turn its own haunted history into a kind of entertainment product. That is so profoundly FNaF. The company does not heal the past, it gamifies it. Help Wanted presents itself in-universe as a virtual reality game, developed partly to laugh off, contain, and repackage the brand's terrifying stories. The logic is almost absurdly corporate. If people think our company is haunted and full of murder lore, then let us make a game about it and control the narrative. But once again, Fazbear Entertainment fails to understand the thing at the center of its own curse. Because in the process of scanning old circuit boards, old systems, or old materials tied to prior animatronics and prior technological remnants, something comes through. Something survives digitization. Something enters the software. This is one of the biggest shifts in the entire series. William Afton is no longer only a corpse in a suit. He becomes, or seems to become, a digital contaminant. This is the rise of Glitchtrap. Glitchtrap is one of the most disturbing forms of Afton because he feels lighter on the surface and more invasive underneath. He is often represented as a smiling yellow rabbit figure, playful and wrong, existing inside digital space. He is less physically decayed than Springtrap, but in some ways even more frightening because he is no longer trapped in one ruined body. He has become transmissible through code. That matters enormously because it means the horror has adapted to a new age. The old pizzerias were haunted by ghosts and machines. The new era is haunted by memory and evil passing into software, simulation, and virtual systems. This is perfectly in line with the series' deeper logic. The brand kept modernizing. So did the curse. Glitchtrap is not merely a spooky avatar. He is William Afton translated into a new form, or at least a continuation of his will, pattern, or influence. Whether understood as direct digital survival, copied consciousness, or something spiritually adjacent, the effect is the same. The murderer finds another way to remain. And, as always, he does not remain alone. This brings us to Vanessa, and to the figure often associated with her darker manipulated persona, Vanny. Vanessa is deeply important because she becomes the new human point of vulnerability in the digital era. Through influence connected to Glitchtrap, she is manipulated, shaped, or controlled in ways that reflect one of FNaF's oldest truths. William Afton survives not only by trapping himself in systems, but by using people. Vanessa's story is painful because it shows the series' horror evolving from dead children in suits into psychological and digital infection. Afton no longer needs only a back room and a mascot costume. He can now enter minds through systems built for entertainment and corporate recovery. Again, Fazbear Entertainment's attempt to fix its image creates a new form of disaster. Now let us pause here for a moment. Imagine the irony. A company builds a VR game to contain rumors about past horrors. That very game becomes the medium through which the old horror returns. The past is not buried by simulation. It is resurrected by it. This is one of the smartest evolutions in the series because it updates the core fear for a modern age while preserving the same deep structure. Entertainment technology built to reassure people becomes a vessel for something it cannot control. And from Help Wanted, we move toward another enormous shift in scale and environment. Security Breach. Security Breach takes us into the Mega Pizzaplex, a vast, neon-lit entertainment complex that feels almost like a dream version of Fazbear Entertainment's original ambitions. It is huge, bright, commercial, child-oriented, and full of polished surfaces. If the original restaurants felt local and tired, the Pizzaplex feels corporate, immersive, and aggressively modern. And yet, because this is FNaF, the brighter and larger the setting becomes, the more deeply disturbing it is. The Pizzaplex is important because it represents Fazbear Entertainment trying not merely to survive its own history, but to outgrow it through scale and spectacle. Bigger spaces, newer technology, glamorous design, security systems, showbiz architecture. Everything about it says, we are no longer the shabby haunted pizzeria of urban legends. and everything underneath says, "Yes, you are." Now, at the center of Security Breach is Gregory, a child protagonist moving through this vast nighttime environment, and Glamrock Freddy, one of the most interesting animatronics in the whole franchise because he behaves protectively toward the child rather than simply hunting him. This matters because it gives the newer era a different emotional texture. Not all animatronics are simply vessels of aggression here. Glamrock Freddy becomes an ally, or at least the closest thing to one available in a world of hostile systems. His presence is almost moving, because in a franchise so full of mascots as danger, here at last is a mascot carrying warmth, confusion, and care. That does not erase the horror. It complicates it, which is very FNaF. Gregory's journey through the Pizzaplex reveals once again that the bright commercial surface hides rot, manipulation, and something older still moving below. The animatronic cast of this era, Montgomery Gator, Roxanne Wolf, Glamrock Chica, and others, all contribute to a setting where personality, performance, branding, and malfunction blend into a very modern kind of unease. And somewhere beneath the Pizzaplex, the series points us downward again. Always downward. Back below the polished stage, back beneath the newest layer. There, old things remain. Ruins of older pizzerias, buried architecture, old systems not truly gone. And within these depths, later lore introduces or emphasizes one of the most important concepts of the newer era, the mimic. Now, the mimic is especially important because it complicates the late mythology in a way that has caused much discussion among fans. Broadly speaking, the mimic is tied to an artificial intelligence or animatronic pattern built around imitation, learning behavior, copying, repeating, adapting. Depending on how one reads the newer lore and its relation to Glitchtrap, Burntrap, and the broader post-Help Wanted continuity, the mimic may represent a crucial layer in how evil, memory, and copied violence continue in the series. This matters a great deal, because one of the deeper questions in late FNaF becomes, is William Afton truly surviving directly every time? Or has the system learned to reproduce him? That is a terrifying possibility, because if evil becomes pattern rather than person, then killing the person is no longer enough. The mimic, in its broader thematic sense, suggests that what William began may have become infrastructural. Repetition, imitation, copied behavior, predation wearing familiar forms. All of that fits FNaF perfectly. The company kept rebuilding. The systems kept learning. The violence kept becoming repeatable. Whether one emphasizes Glitchtrap as Afton-like code, or as a product of scanned remnants and reproduced predatory logic, the late series moves toward one deeply unsettling thought. The original killer may no longer be the only thing that matters. What matters is the template, and templates survive. Now let us step back and look at the whole story from this final height. We began with family diners and old mascots, with Henry Emily and William Afton, with Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, with one frightened child, one murdered girl. Then came the missing children, the haunted animatronics, the company cover-ups, the old restaurants fading into rumors and night shifts. Then the Afton family deepened the tragedy. Elizabeth and Circus Baby, Michael and the underground facility, William and his hidden experiments. Then came punishment, Springtrap in the suit, Fazbear's Fright, the fires, Henry's final trap. And after all of that, the story moved again. Into digital systems, into VR, into manipulated minds, into giant entertainment complexes, into AI patterns, mimicry, and the possibility that the curse has outgrown the man who started it. This is why Five Nights at Freddy's endures. Because beneath the jump scares, the fan theories, the hidden mini-games, and the endless clues, it tells a very particular kind of horror story. A story about how institutions preserve violence. A story about how corporations keep reopening what should have been buried. A story about how children's spaces can become burial grounds disguised as party rooms. A story about family guilt stretched through machinery. And perhaps most of all, a story about how the past does not stay in the past when it is built into systems that keep running. That may be the deepest truth in all of FNaF. The horror is not only the ghost, and not only the machine. It is the machine that keeps operating after the ghost enters it. That is why the pizzerias matter. That is why the offices matter. That is why the hidden rooms, the springlocks, the maintenance corridors, the backstages, the music boxes, the circuit boards, the VR scans, and the giant plexes all matter. Because each new layer tries to modernize, monetize, or repurpose what came before, and each time, the old pain returns in a new form. So now, as we bring this long story gently to rest, let us walk once more through its quiet images. A small diner with two old mascots under warm lights, a child crying at a birthday party, rain outside a restaurant where Charlie never comes home, a pizzeria stage full of smiling animals holding dead children inside, a security office fan turning in the dark, a clown-faced animatronic standing alone in an underground chamber, a killer crushed inside a rabbit suit, a horror attraction built from history's leftovers, a father speaking through flame to the souls gathered in his final trap, a rabbit shape moving in digital static, a neon mega-complex still hiding an older ruin below. This is the world of Five Nights at Freddy's. Not simply haunted, layered, not simply scary, sad, not simply about what jumps at you in the dark, but about what happens when joy, childhood, technology, business, and grief are all folded into the same machine and never properly switched off. So now, let the stage lights dim. Let the cameras go dark one by one. Let the office fan finally stop. Let the music box wind down. Let the old suits remain empty where they can. Let the children who can rest, rest. Let the brand's endless reopenings fade into silence. And let the long, tangled timeline of Freddy's carry itself gently into stillness. Because for tonight, this is enough. Sleep well, and drift softly out of the pizzeria